One invaluable tool for 3D animation is the graph editor, but it can be the most scariest and confusing thing that you've ever laid eyes on. See what I mean? Look at all that spaghetti. In this video, I'll explain what those curves mean, how to control them, and what interpolation is. And then I'll give you the secret to understanding every curve you're ever going to see. Yep, that's right, every single curve that you're ever going to see. So firstly, what are the curves and what is the graph editor? Let's quickly go over some basics with a much simpler example. Every object in 3D has what's called transforms. That's just a fancy way of breaking up the object's location, its rotation, and its scale into separate channels, in this case being the X, the Y, and the Z for each of those. You can see that if I adjust this X channel here for the location, our monkey head moves to the left and the right in world space. If I adjust the Y channel, it moves forward and backwards, and the Z channel moves up and down. I'm just going to quickly set up some simple animation on this monkey head and then show you the graph editor. So don't worry about following along for this bit, or if it doesn't make sense, I'll explain it in detail a little bit later on. So I'm just setting a keyframe on our first frame here. I am setting a keyframe 20 frames later, and then setting our monkey head back to the start. That's great. So I've set 3 keyframes, one here at the start, one at frame 21, and then back at the start again on frame 41. So how do we actually tell the computer where we want this monkey head to be on the frames in between our keyframes here? Well, that's where the graph editor comes in. So let me just quickly open it up by grabbing the bottom left corner of the screen there and then dragging it up, creating some space, and then changing our new window to be the graph editor. So what is the graph editor? The graph editor is just a visual representation of the changes over time. The vertical axis here is the value of our specific channel, and the horizontal axis is the specific frame number. So you can see here on frame 1, our Z location is at 0. On frame 21, you can see that our value is at 3. And on frame 41, you can see that our value is back at 0. You can also get more information about the specific keys by opening the properties panel. You can hit the N key for that, or also just hit the plus on the right of the graph editor. So then you'll get some tabs. If you open up the F curve tab, you'll see some information about the specific keyframe that you have highlighted. So this keyframe here, it exists on frame 21 and its value is 3. If I select this one here, it exists on frame 41 and its value is 0. So let me just hide that for now. So now it's time to explain how we can manipulate these keys inside the graph editor. Now the same hotkeys that work inside the 3D viewport also work inside our graph editor. So I can grab this key and move it around with the G key, I can rotate it with the R key, and I can also scale it with the S key. So that's all fine and dandy, but what is interpolation? Well, the definition of interpolation is to insert something between fixed points. And in 3D animation, our fixed points are these keyframes here, and the thing that we're inserting is this line that connects the two. This line is our interpolation. Now there's several different ways we can change the behavior of our keyframe here to change the actual curve itself. I'll speak on that in a moment, but first let's talk about why we would want to do that. Well, what if we wanted more precise control over where we want our monkey head to be anywhere in between these keyframes without having to set more keys? We do that by adjusting our handles or adjusting the interpolation. If I grab our handle here and move it around, you can see that the location of the monkey head moves inside the 3D viewport. So this is how we manipulate our interpolation to get more precise control of where we want our monkey head to be without setting extra keyframes. So that's why we would want to adjust our interpolation. Let's zoom in on our graph editor and explain more about the how. So there are 2 menus in the graph editor that you'll be using quite often. That will be the interpolation type menu with the T key and the handle type menu with the V key. They're also available in the key menu down here. One is called the interpolation mode with the with the T hotkey next to it, and the handle type with the V next to it. So the three main ones that we're concerned with today are the constant, the linear, and the Bezier. We don't need to worry ourselves with these options over here. They're more for motion graphics and you don't have a lot of manual control over them. So we won't be covering them in this course. So the ones that we're concerned with today are the constant interpolation type, the linear, and the Bezier. And as you can see from our little pictures here, you can see that the only one that has handles on the keyframe is the Bezier interpolation mode. So that's actually what we're in now. So let's focus on that before we look at the others. The Bezier interpolation mode is the only mode that gives you keyframes with these handles on the end of them. You can actually change the way that these handles behave by using the handle type menu. We can bring that up by pressing the V key or down here in the key handle type. So I'll go through each of the modes now. If I change this handle type to free, each individual arm has now turned black. And now if I grab the individual arm, it's independent of the other side. The vector handle type is an automatic handle type. It will always point the arms of the handles towards the adjacent keyframe. It will also automatically update no matter whether you move the keyframe itself or the adjacent one. One thing to note though, that if you try and manipulate these handles, they will change color. Now you can see that it's changed to a black color. It's no longer a vector automatic handle, it's changed to the freestyle handle. Our aligned handle is connected somewhat like a seesaw. If we grab one arm and move it down, the other one will move up. However, if you translate to the left or the right, the arms scale independently of each other. Our automatic handle type is an automatic handle which will always try and create a smooth line between the adjacent keyframes. That's regardless of whether we move the adjacent key or the actual key itself. One thing to note though, that if we try and do any manual manipulation of this key, it will change to being the aligned and no longer automatic. So that means if I rotate it, scale, or grab an individual handle. And finally, our automatic clamped handle. It'll always create a smooth connection between the adjacent curves, but it will never create an overshoot. You'll see what I mean if I change this one back to automatic. You can see that the curve overshoots the value here, whereas the clamped will just always be flat. And you may have guessed, just like our other automatic handles, if you manually manipulate them, it will change to the aligned handle type. So that's the Bezier interpolation mode explained. Let's have a look at the linear interpolation mode. So if I just change this to linear, you'll see that our handles have disappeared, and we just have these keyframes that are basically just a single point. Now we can add more points if we like, and you can see that there are no handles. Each of these keyframes is just connected by a straight linear line. And finally, our constant interpolation mode looks exactly like the picture. So this interpolation mode will stay on a constant value until the next keyframe, and then it'll snap to that position without any interpolation at all. This is often referred to as stepped keys, and it's pretty obvious to see why that is the case. Whew. Well, that felt like a lot of technical information to take in at once. But I don't want you to stress if you felt like you didn't understand everything as we went through. Because really, when we start animating, we're not actually thinking about, is my handle a vector? Is it free? You'll find what happens over time is that you automatically just stop thinking about the technical stuff and you just focus on what's actually happening on the screen. Right, so on that topic, here's how you understand every curve that you're ever going to see. Every curve that you'll see in the graph editor will be a combination of these two key shapes. On the left we have a linear line, and on the right we have a curve, which in this case is bending up. Our linear example could be increasing like it does here, it could be quite flat, or it could even be decreasing in the negative direction. Our curved example could start off slow in the positive direction and then speed up. It could start off fast in the positive direction and slow down. It could go in the opposite direction altogether, where it starts off slow in the negative direction and then speeds up. Or it could start off negative and fast, and then slow down. Every curve is a combination of these key shapes. Our S example here starts off in the positive direction and then speeds up, hits a point in the middle, and then starts to slow down. A V shape here goes in the negative direction and speeds up, and then changes directions altogether, where it goes back towards the top fast and then slows down. And finally, our stepped example, or our constant example, is really just a bunch of flat linear lines. Now let's have a more practical look at what happens inside the software. Here we are back inside Blender with the welcome return of our circle character. And below him we have our timing chart. Each one of these ticks represents the location of the ball along our path here. And below that window we have our very familiar graph editor. At the moment you'll notice that it is in linear mode, so we have no handles on these keys. So what I'd like to do now is play our animation and then move our second key around, just to show you how the changes reflect inside our viewport here. So if I grab our second key and move it down, you'll notice that our ball doesn't move quite as far. And if I move it up, you'll notice that it goes way past the screen. So that tells me that the vertical axis represents the value. Now what happens if I move it to the left? You notice that the amount of ticks has decreased and our ball has sped up. And if I move it to the right, the amount of ticks has increased and our ball has slowed down. So that tells me that the horizontal axis represents our timing. So what part of the graph editor actually represents our spacing? Well, that's the line itself. At the moment we can't do very much with our linear mode, so I'm just going to select these keys and change it to the Bezier. And then you'll notice instantly the changes that has been reflected in our timing chart up here. You notice that the spacing is closer towards the start and the end, and that's exactly what's happening in our S curve down here. We've got small changes at the start, it speeds up in the middle, and then it slows down towards the end. So one of the terminologies for this would be a slow out or an ease out. It's sometimes called a cushion out as well. And the same is true for the other end of our curve. So this could be a slow in, an ease in, or a cushion in. It all means the same thing. So let's move our curve around now and see the changes reflected inside our viewport. So now we have quite a big spacing gap at the start and then slowing down towards the end. Let's move it around the other way. Okay, so we've got slow to fast. And while I'm here, I'll just show you the constant and play that mode. You see that there are no spacing in between. It just snaps instantly to our last frame here. So that's pretty much everything you need to know about the graph editor, just for the minute. There is more to learn, but we'll pick that up as we go along. But for now, before we move on to our first animation exercise, I want you to download this file and have a good play around with it. You can play the animation and adjust our keys and see it update in the actual viewport up here. Don't be afraid to try and break things. You can even insert extra keys with the control and the left click. Change our handle types with the V key. Change our actual interpolation mode with the T key. And also you can experiment with these extra ones over here. See what they do. The more you can practice with the graph editor, the easier it's going to be later down the road. So have some fun, and I'll see you in the next video.